Yes, yes, yes. What is up, General Strike Podcast family? A little fun debate show today with my good friend from MCR, the one and only Gary in Dallas. And it should be a fun one. We did talk about this, I think, like 2 weeks ago originally. And it was supposed to be me reading some more anarchist literature, some more anarchist syndicates literature specifically. I just didn't do that. I'll just be honest. I got preoccupied, read a different book. So now it would be primarily a Marxism versus libertarianism, or as Gary would probably more accurately want to be referred to as a anarcho-capitalist debate. And it should be a fun one because I think that will probably be a better debate or conversation, let's say. And not really a debate. It's always fun with us, Gary, right?
Absolutely.
But this one should be more interesting because I feel like, at least traditionally speaking, Gary, libertarians, anarcho-capitalists definitely don't like Marxist-leninists. That seems like, Ayn Rand would probably have some issues with Marxist-leninism overall, right? So there's a lot to get into on today's show, and it'll be a fun conversation. Gary, how are you, man?
I'm well. I'm really, really well. You were explaining to me, and you sent in a group chat some of the writings of Lenin, and I wouldn't have never guessed that. Like he was opposed to the state. That sounds like something Rothbard would write. You know what I'm saying? Like that sounded. The only thing the government can do is arrest you, steal your money, or start a war, right? Like, and that's kind of right. Like everything government does comes from the threat of one of those three things. Mm-hmm. We'll steal your money, we'll arrest you, or we'll blow you up.
And I think I'm sorry.
And like, yeah, I agree with that. Now, how we respond to that, we fundamentally agree on that. The difference is how would we respond to that and how we would get rid of that, right? I think that there probably is the foundation. It's like the foundation of it. We're seeing the same thing. Like if we write a number 6 on the ground and I stand on one side, you stand on the other side, you see a 9, I see a 6, but we're looking at the same thing. And I think it's kind of one of those things where we may agree on the cause and the problem of things. We're just seeing it from a completely different angle.
Let me read a quick excerpt from Lenin in State and Revolution. That's kind of to that point on the similarities and differences of anarchists. And obviously, this is more towards leftist anarchism, not towards anarcho-capitalism, which I think I will have some questions about in a minute. But I just want to sort of set some similar sort of foundational level we have with each other, right? Reads from page 52. I forget what section this is. The polemic against the anarchists in this section. We do not at all disagree with anarchists on the question of the abolition of the state as an aim. We maintain that to achieve this aim, temporary use must be made of the instruments, means, and methods of the state power against the exploiters, just as the dictatorship of the oppressed class is temporarily necessary for the annihilation of classes. Now, obviously, the last time I read anything that was like libertarian or anarcho-capitalist literature was almost a decade ago. So it's been a long time. So I do have a few questions for you, Gary, if that's okay, if we can start there. Or if you have for me first, that's fine as well. I'm okay with you having questions first, whichever you prefer.
No, I have one fundamental question, which we'll come back to. Like it won't be answered in 30 seconds, I don't think, unless maybe you'll surprise. You know what I'm saying? It's a complex question, yeah.
So I have a few questions for you because we talked originally on the last debate show about hierarchies and the innate problem with them, of course, right? And even the issues, obviously, of the state as a whole, which you mentioned. I think we all know that the state is meant as sort of a tool of order, which just means oppression of certain classes to keep class antagonism, which means certain classes in conflict with each other, in stability. That's sort of the innate creation of the state and why it was created. You have people of certain sort of wealth or sort of ability in a community, and they were ruling over others, and they created a state to sort of keep the order between them and the oppressed. I think we can probably agree on that, right?
And I just want to preface it with one thing. I'm not going to have answers to everything. I don't claim to
Oh,
have an answer to everything. I don't claim to know everything. So there's going to be times to say, I don't know what a better option is, right? Like if
Mhm.
you know, I'm from Texas. If this was 1836 and you said to me, okay, we're going to join the United States and we're going to have slavery, I would say no. And then you would say, well, I don't know of any better way to pick cotton. Do you? It's not really relevant to me. I don't know a better way, but I don't need to. 1845, I'm sorry, 1836 when we declared our independence, right? In 1845, we're going to join the U.S.
Right.
We're going to have.
Oh my God, getting your Texas history wrong?
Yeah, 1845, we're going to join the U.S. We're going to have slavery. I would say, no, we're not. We're not going to have chattel slavery. And they say, well, give me a better way to pick cotton for cheaper. Well, I don't have one, but I don't need to have a solution to say that yours is immoral and I'm not going to partake in it, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say I have an answer to everything.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just likewise, like I'm not an academic on Marxism, so I'm not going to say I have the answer for everything, of course, as well. But we both agree on the inherent issue of state hierarchies and just the innate issue of the state as a whole, right? Just the state as an apparatus without sort of a added caveat of a democratic republic. It doesn't matter. A state, period, is a form of oppression, right? I think we both agree on that. How do you come to terms with capital, which means the innate nature of a few holding the means of production, the profits of labor, the control of natural resources above the majority? How do you reconcile that with a view of the state being innately wrong because of its hierarchies, but capitalism somehow, in your view, is separate from that or is not under that issue? I just wanted maybe you to clarify that for me, because I know we talked about that briefly in the last show, but I felt like we could have hammered home that point more.
Because government is based on force, violence, the threat of force, the threat of violence, the threat of stealing your money. Free markets are based on voluntary transactions where like you go to the store, you buy a slice of pizza, you give them your $3, they give you a slice of pizza, you say thank you, they say thank you, transaction's complete. We made that transaction because we both thought it bettered ourselves, right? There's no force involved. So they're based solely on transactions. We at least think better ourselves. Now, not everyone is going to better you. You go back, you look at the Brooklyn Nets trade with the Boston Celtics, like the Garnett and Pierce trade. It's a voluntary transaction. Benefited one side and damned the other one, right? But there was perceived benefit from both sides. So they agreed to it and they said thank you, and we're happy with what they got, at least at the time. So the fact that it's based on voluntarism, it's based on, I think it mutually benefits me and you think it benefits you, let's make this transaction. There's no need to involve state or force or anything else. I have something you want, you have something I want, let's make a deal.
Now, how do you reconcile your belief in that being capitalism? Because I don't share that is what capitalism is.
So let's use the word free markets. I understand why you would say that. I do. So let's use the word free markets.
Okay, I want to get to this point a little bit in a second, but let me just ask this question and see if you have an answer for it. If you don't, we can go on to the bigger point, which I want to make. How do you reconcile that belief in free markets with capitalism, whatever you want to call it, with the creation of free markets and capitalism, which was the state coming in and enclosing the commons from the people, and that being the jettison, the catalyst of capital accumulation, of primitive accumulation? How do you reconcile that? Because that's how capitalism was created.
Right, but that's so that the state can tax it. Right, that's so the state can have its hands on it and they can put their hand in the cookie jar. If you remove the state, you would simply have people acting in their own best interest. Right, I will buy something from you or sell something to you if it benefits me. You'll buy it or sell it if it benefits you. Right, kind of like the way stocks on a thinly traded stock. I'll buy it at a certain price. I'll sell it at a certain price, but I need to find someone to buy it. Largely traded stocks, big companies don't trade like that. You just dump it back on the open market. But you know what I'm saying? I found something that I want. You found something that you want. The government, the creation, like you said, of capitalism as we know it was created by the state so they can tax you, so that they can get their hands on it.
But it's not just that. It was a creation of the aristocratic class to seize land and resources, and then to use wage labor to extrapolate the profits of those natural resources to sort of, again, stay as the dominant class. When you talk about anarcho-capitalism, this is sort of a bigger question. I don't know if you have the answer for this, and because again, I haven't read any anarcho-capitalist stuff in like 6 years. I don't remember the last time you've read it either, so I don't know how fresh you are on it. But the idea of this sort of dominant class disappearing in anarcho-capitalism, how does that come about? Because
it's not going to disappear, right? Look, there's always going to be people who are smarter, sharper, wiser, more ruthless, who are willing to make more money. As long as it's legal, though, it is what it is, right? I mean, there are some people, like we were talking about, who are just addicted to making money, and those people are going to have more money, right? It's just like on a basketball court. Like, we can say we're going to pass the ball around, but in the fourth quarter, the ball's going to end in Kobe's hands because he's the best at it, right? That's just organically going to happen. Like, the wealth is organically going to go to those who are the most gifted at accumulating wealth.
But that's not true, because the basis of that accumulation was not that. The basis of that accumulation, okay, because you're talking about this hypothetical world. We're talking about like actual history, right? The actual history of capitalism was from the aristocratic class in England taking hold of capital. Okay, so at every point, that is not true, because the innate capture of capital, which has never left their hands, right? The people that are millionaires today were like 90% of them were born into millionaires and millionaire families, right? Like that's just, I think that's around 90%, right? So we know that wealth hoards itself, right? So when we talk about the initial accumulation of capital, it wasn't done by this sort of free trade, this sort of open market system. It was done by an aristocratic class taking what was already open to the public and taking from themselves and making the public work for it for a wage, right? So how do we get away from that? Because that's what it is, and that's what it's always has been. And if you're for the existence of hierarchies within economics, how do you reconcile that, again, sort of with my first question again, how do you reconcile that with your principal belief that hierarchies within government is wrong? So I feel like if you have the innate principle that hierarchies within government is wrong, you should believe that hierarchies within the economy, especially extreme hierarchies in the way we talk about them, right? We're not talking about minute hierarchies or differences, right? We're talking about extreme wealth inequality, right? How do you reconcile that? And
it's not that government hierarchies are immoral. It's that government is immoral. It's based on stolen money. It's based on stealing. It's funded by stealing. And
so is capitalism. It's founded in stealing. It's based in stealing.
I don't agree that it's founded. Like if we start a country today, we'll call it a capitalist.
We can't talk about fantasy. We talk about the realities of capitalism and how it was created, right? We have to be scientific with this approach. Yeah. The realities is capitalism was created by the top dominating ruling class of Britain.
Sure, and
they stole the common land. Sorry, I didn't finish my point. I forgot. Sorry, they stole the common land that was used for grazing, for hunting, by the common folk. That is, and by your definition, stealing.
That's stealing, and that's entirely wrong. That's why, like in what I'm envisioning, there is no Britain, Matt. There's your land, there's my land, and then there's anyone else's. Okay, but there's no Britain.
So that's never existed, right?
I mean, it had to exist at some point, right? Before someone said this was Britain, it wasn't, right? Britain only exists lines on a map. It's an idea. You can't see it from space. It's just a concept, right? It's just an idea. So before someone said this is Britain, it was just, there was an island, and someone said this is my island.
Then what you're talking about is not a capitalist society. You understand that, right? Like transactional societies are not capitalism.
How? Okay.
Transactions can happen within communist societies, within Marxist societies, anarchist societies. Transactional nature within a business and a consumer can absolutely happen within those societies. That's not a purely capitalistic nature, and it existed pre-capitalist as well. You do understand like transactions happened before capitalism.
So that's what I'm saying. Just voluntary. Again, if we don't want to use the word capitalism, I'm fine with that. If you want to use a voluntary free market, I will get rid of the word capitalism and say voluntary free market. But if I said that, the people listening are going to be, what do you mean by that? Well, I basically mean capitalism without a governing structure.
But then you understand and accept that economic hierarchies and extreme hierarchies will exist, and you're okay with that.
I mean, what do you mean by am I okay with it? As long as
your principal belief is that you're not okay with the nature of government, right? So that's why you're anti-state, right?
Correct.
And the reason why you're anti-state is because state naturally has hierarchies of abuse, right?
Well, it's fundamentally immoral. It's fundamentally based on theft and violence, and I'm opposed to theft and violence.
So is capitalism. Capitalism is based on the exploitation and extrapolation of surplus labor and surplus natural resources.
But it doesn't have to be. Government has to be funded on theft. Otherwise, it's not government.
Gary, when I talk about like Marxism, and maybe that's when you have questions for me. We'll get to that. I can point to historical examples of our system and how it would look, right? Your example has never existed, right? In terms of capitalism, right? From the dawning of capitalism, right on the 15th century, give or take, right, to now, that has never existed.
From the 15th century, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, because when you talk about a pre-capitalist society of sort of being anarchist, whether it be tribalistic societies, whatever
that's what I was going to go to.
Those are innately not capitalistic in terms of how their transactions are dealt with, in terms of the nature of them. If you, just for those that are listening, you as well, Gary, David Graeber has an excellent book on this called The First 5,000 Years of Debt, which he talks about debt, the idea of personal debt being the bartering system that we often talk about and we mischaracterize. And it's very fascinating. There's actually a whole talk he did with like Google, I think, about it. If you want to check it out on YouTube, it's worth listening.
If you looked up, and I don't have, but if you went to Investopedia or something like that and looked up the word capitalism, it would say something along the lines of the individual owned and controlled means of production. And that's what when I say capitalism. But
the individual owning of the means of production leads to extreme wealth. It leads, to extreme wealth inequality. Mm-hmm. You add that word to it, and will lead to the oppression of a lower economic class.
I don't necessarily agree with that last part.
Collectively owned, then the nature of the needs of the people are taken care of because the people own the means of production.
You're saying, okay, I'm saying individual. You're saying
society,
people as a whole of a given community.
Yes,
right.
And even you might even semi-agree with this because you live with this in a sense. With your, you've talked about this before, I think, in the last debate show about your. Forgive me if I mischaracterize it. The way your community deals with road management, right?
Road management, garbage, waste. Now, everything, electricity, everything. Yeah,
I don't know the exact nature and mechanics of your community and how it handles this, but I'm assuming there's some sort of voting that happens for what company handles your road management, such like that, right? Imagine that towards a business, right? I mean, think about this, Gary. You want, and this is probably more of like my beliefs now, right? You want you want say in what your government or what your community or society does, right? Whatever word we want to use and whatever variation we want to use, right? You want to have a say in it, right? When your taxpayer dollars are going to bombing the Middle East, you want to have an equal say in it and not allow a sort of ruling class, let's call it, to ignore your wishes, ignore your votes, and to still declare war and drop bombs with your taxpayer dollars. You think that's wrong, right?
Yes.
Don't you think it's also wrong? Well, let's say if you've been working within a company and that company decides we're moving to Mexico and we're cutting all of our production jobs here.
Is it wrong? Morally wrong?
Yeah, but yeah, absolutely. If you talk about the morality of the state, then you have to talk about the morality of the economic system as well. Can you not?
Okay, so that's and I like that question, right? So the state is fundamentally immoral. I mean, let me get through this. The state is fundamentally immoral, because it's based on theft and violence, right? That's what it's based on. Corporations are amoral. They don't have morals. The only moral they have is the people that make them up, right? If you put 5 moral people on the board of directors, you would have a moral company. If you put 5 immoral people on the board of directors, you'd have an immoral company.
You can use that same argument for the state, right?
No, you can't, because fundamentally it's based on theft. It's based on theft and violence.
But Gary, same with capitalism. Capitalist accumulation, Gary, requires the extrapolation of surplus wealth and resources. What we see in reality is corporations going to places like Guatemala, places like China, places like Taiwan, places like India, and paying them 50 cents an hour, right, to make iPads, make tires, make rubber products, whatever it is, right? That's what we see. So
again,
when you talk about capitalism, and again, Gary, you still haven't jettisoned completely from the point of defending capitalism. So that's why I keep hammering this point of talking about it. Okay. You talk about the innate evil of the state because it's based on theft and murder, then so is capitalism, because we see that. We see it with our eyes. Me
going to China and paying someone 50 cents a day or whatever you said, to build an iPad, they agreed to it. They voluntarily agreed to it. We may think it's morally unjust and it's morally disgusting, but they agreed to it, which means they believe their life is better off if they do it, right? Now, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't send Mike, but you know what I'm saying? If let's say I'm a Fortune 500 company and my stocks are sold.
But Gary, you can just move to a different country if you don't like this country.
Actually, right now I can't. Right now I would. But right now I actually can't. They won't let me in. That's actually not true. But
hold on. Same with that Chinese worker. If they don't like that pay, they can't just move to a different company. That's just not the reality.
But they took that job because they believe that job betters them.
No. They took that job because they have to. Because the society, because the society is a capitalist society, and capitalism from its foundation. Because Gary, I always talk about the scientific nature of it and the history of these systems. I think that's how these systems have developed, and that's how these systems are still here, and that's how they act. Right? When we talk about like the 1744 Vagrancy Act, which made it illegal to not work for the common wage, that was taken to every capitalist nation after that, after England enacted that law.
And I would oppose that too, because your right to work includes your right not to work, right? It's like your right to free speech includes your right to not speak, right? So to me that's strictly opposes free market, saying you have to work or you have that's a violation of free market. They're no longer free.
But when we talk about wage labor, okay, we talk about minimum wage even existing, right? The idea that like, oh, they voluntarily choose to get paid minimum wage, that's not true at all. From how the minimum wage first gets enacted by the state, and secondly, how those corporations lobby the state to enact those minimum wage laws. Okay, and if you take out the state, that does that all that will be created is that minimum wage drops and we get chattel slavery again, right? Like the only thing holding capitalism from feudalism is the state.
No. The minimum wage standards are set up to protect the rich, right? It keeps wages low. Well, here's what I'm allowed to pay you, so here's what I'm going to pay you, right? If you remove minimum wages would organically go up, right? We talked about Switzerland last time. Okay,
I can look that up, but that's not true.
We said Switzerland didn't have a minimum wage until 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Gary,
and now their minimum wage.
You ignore the social safety nets in that country.
That's different. That's two different discussions. Which
counterbalance the need for a minimum wage to uplift any sort of poverty. Right. The only reason that capitalist states of any nature, whether it be monarchies or democratic republics, like capitalist countries, right? The only reason why they enact minimum wages is to alleviate poverty and sort of a handout to the poor that's not really going to alleviate any real poverty, right?
The skeptic in me tells me that it creates minimum wage to appease corporations and to keep people in poverty. That's my belief. right? That's the skeptic in me.
Wage, period, is to keep people in poverty.
No, wages in exchange
of
for your labor, right? I mean, you exchange your.
But when you talk about the ancient anarchist societies, or even the modern ones that are tribalistic, right? They don't work off of wage at all when it comes to transactions. The wage labor does not exist in anarchist societies. They're the ones that we materially can look at and analyze. Wage labor does not exist. Most likely money doesn't exist in those societies as well.
That was my next point, right? So
I mean, would you be in favor of the abolition of money then?
I don't want to. I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to explain to me. You know, I don't know. That's like such a. You know what I'm saying? I'm not prepared to. I thought of it, right? Like that, but I don't know. Goal? What would you? I don't know what that would look like. Like I can't. I'm not fit to answer that question. Not to cop out.
No, that's totally fine. I wasn't going to really attack you on that. Don't worry. I don't think I'm the most expert on, or the biggest expert on that issue as well. But I would say recommend. It's not particularly on the abolition of money, but modern monetary theory is very, very interesting to look into. MMT is the short term for it, right? Look into that, Gary. Fascinating, because I know you're more of a financial market sort of wizard. I'll say that, right, Gary? You'd be by that, right? I forget where we're at, to be honest. I don't feel like you have like completely reconciled your principled beliefs here, because, and maybe you have, and I just don't understand it, Gary. Maybe you can reiterate it.
We fundamentally agree that when we say 50 cents a day, whatever you said the wage was, you know, let's call it 50 cents a day.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Obama did lobby for that for Haiti. It was like about 50 cents a day for Haitian workers. Shout out to Obama and neoliberalism, right?
You view that as theft. I understand how you view that as theft. I don't agree with that. I'm saying if someone does that, they're now better off than they were without that job, right? It's like child labor. Who would put their child to work unless that child was going to starve to death without working? I mean, we have kids. Would you put your kid to work? Of course you wouldn't. Not unless you had to, unless the other alternative was starving to death, right?
Well, why don't we just not have them get paid below poverty levels at all? Like, why like, if we're talking about like that's what I don't understand about anarcho-capitalism, to be honest, and with you, Gary, in particular, right? Because I feel like you have a very empathetical side to you, but like this is just a stopping gap to your mind, and I don't get it. You know, if we're talking about like what ought to be, which is philosophy, right? Not political science, right? Sure. But what ought to be, which is I think more where like you like to be. You like to be more in like the hypotheticals, right? I know. Hey, I know libertarians, man. I love them some hypotheticals. I love it. If you're going to go as far as to like imagine and want a society without a state, why wouldn't you go just the extra step? Not even the extra step, just the side step to like want and envision a society where like the theft of one's labor doesn't happen. The theft of one's natural resources doesn't happen. And my understanding, from what I have read in my travels, the only way you get to that is not through individual ownership of the means of production. Because what we have seen, and that's where I go back to the science of it, what we've seen is that that's never existed. When we have collective ownership of the means of production, that's when we get a true egalitarian society that I think a lot of people want.
It's never happened on a large scale, right? But it certainly happens on a small scale. I own what's on my property. I can make what I want on my property, and I can sell it at whatever price I want to. And if people want to buy it, that's up to them. So I control the means of production on a very small.
But that's immaterial to the reality of the system of a Walmart, of a Target. Like if the state goes away, what happens to Walmart? They're not going to turn all their.
If the state goes away, they stop getting bailouts and they stop getting government handouts, and Walmart goes away.
No, Walmart.
Or it's fundamentally different. It's not Walmart as we know it.
Walmart just makes their employees go from $15 an hour to $10 an hour to $5 an hour to nothing. That's just the natural.
I disagree with that.
The need to, not the need, the innate system of extrapolating wealth from people's labor and surplus labor, right? You're going to always want them to be as underpaid as possible, right?
And the way you do that is you get the government to enact a wage saying, I only have to pay you this much. And then you work off of that wage.
But if the government didn't exist, all you would have are these multi-billion and trillion-dollar companies, Gary. So would they just all of a sudden become egalitarian in nature?
No, of course not. Not unless they wanted to. So the answer is no.
Right? So then, what happens then? Like,
I don't agree with your premise. I don't agree that that's all you'd have. I don't agree with that premise. I disagree. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't.
Okay, time. Then walk me through. Let's say, all right, beginning to end here, Gary, if you can, and potentially as succinctly as possible too. Walk me through how we get from today, real world, to an anarcho-capitalist society. Like as much as you can. What are the machinations to get to that point, and what does it look like? What are these intermediary periods? What do they look like? I'm curious.
Boy,
because
okay.
I assume you'll probably ask me this at some point about Marxism, and I can probably answer this to some degree.
No, I mean, how do I get rid of the state, right?
Right.
There you go. I mean,
it was a cough. YouTube. Wink, 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 wink. Right. Okay. After that, okay, what happens?
The abolition of federal state-owned land, right?
And quickly, in your mind, who would lead this R word? Which isn't the other R word, which is like really bad. But like, what would lead this R word? Like who would lead this R word in your mind?
We the Texans. We the people.
Okay. Continue.
I mean,
No. Okay, no. I want. Is it the Kobe's and the Bill Gates of the world leading it, or is it the people, as you said, the masses, right?
It would have to be the masses, which is why it becomes far-fetched, because most people are comfortable in the life that they have, right? Like,
get over that point for a second.
Okay,
I understand that, and the Marxist perspective has also a critique of that. So yes, I completely understand that issue. Let's get past that for a point. Okay, now we're past the R where I just wanted to understand who was leading it from your perspective. Okay, we're at that point. They've stormed the halls. What happened?
So now the federal government, state government, local government is no longer existing. Now we just have Wild West type of idea, which wasn't that wild, right? And all government controlled and owned land is now auctioned off. So there's no more Washington, D.C., no more federal park. That's all auctioned off. It's all sold off. What does that do to the price of everything?
Auction off by individuals?
It's right. So like kind of like how I think kind of how Native Americans work. Okay, since there's no more government structure, we live on this land, like the 20 of us. And this would be tougher in LA, right? Because there's so many more people than it would be in Duval County, Texas, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But this is our land. We'll split it up how we want to. We'll split up the proceeds when we auction off this land and sell up this land how we choose to, right? I mean, there's 10 of us. Maybe we'll get 10% each. Maybe each family will get a cut, whatever. This is our land and we'll do with it. Maybe we keep it ourselves and we farm the land and cultivate the land. But that land basically now, because there's no more federal government, becomes that of we the people. And then it's kind of,
so it's collectively owned.
If that's what the people, sure, more or less, it's owned.
Sorry, Garrett. Come on, I had to. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So it's not Bill Gates auctioning off. It's not the Jeff Bezos auctioning off this land
Because they never owned it, right? Like we're talking about like federal land,
now.
state land.
Oh, it's not federal state land. Okay, talking about the federal and state land. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not talking about commercial and residential areas.
No, you get to keep. There's two types of land: my land and not my land. That's it. There's no other type of land. I control what happens on my land and nothing else.
So what about the the large scale landowners, in terms of like apartment complex owners, right? In terms of the Jeff Bezos who own commercial land, right? Like, what do you say? Like, what happens to them since they still own in a lot of sense the means of production, and it's individually owned? So you have the state and federal land, which is being auctioned off, but I don't think that's is that the majority of land right now?
No, it's not. I mean, it's majority. Like Nevada is majority, Utah, but
Yeah,
it's not
it
the
might be
majority of the
state.
land of the country. Yeah.
I was curious about that. So like, what happens there? Like, so we have this movement going on of the people collectively owning federal and state and municipal land, right? Sort of the public land, right? As you know, as we used to call it now, right? We publicly own it, truly. We're auctioning off to people that need it in that sense, right? Truly egalitarian, right? And I love it. I love this idea. But we still have the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Walton family of the world. We still have all these big techno companies. We still have. So what happens with them?
Well, they get to keep their property, but they lose all their carve-outs and exemptions. So now they're probably going to have to sell that because they stop getting carve-outs from the government, and they're not going to be as powerful because they don't get handouts from the government, right? So I mean, we don't take it from them because that's theft. But organically, they're not going to get that big because they're not chosen as winners by the federal government.
Now, what sort of organizational setup do the people have? I'm curious. Like
that's so that's voluntary, right? And this is where I don't have perfect answers, but I know the system that we have now is immoral, and I don't support it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I know the current system based on governments taxing people, throwing people in jail, and starting wars is immoral. So I don't support that. How would it work? It would work voluntarily, right? Like, so I live in a community. We would decide these are the laws that we want to live by. Now you can say, is that a state? I would say it's not, right? We're going to start arguing over that definition.
So
right?
how do you upscale that? We have 400 million people here.
But that's it. There's no way to say it.
Go ahead. Let me finish. Let me finish, Gary.
All right.
So we, again, the pre-paradigm in this world, right? This hypothetical we're going down was 400 million about people. All of a sudden, borders are gone, right? And I'm assuming in this hypothetical, you're going to go the step further and say that this is an international movement as well, right? Okay.
That would be ideal. Okay. Ideally, yeah.
Let's just go to the ideal then, right, Gary?
Yeah. Hypothetically.
Yeah, of course. So all these borders are gone. So how do we upscale that? So we have, companies like Apple, companies like GM, companies like Raytheon that have holdings, have property in a dozen other countries. We have the multinational, sort of big, almost monopolized, companies that have the majority of wealth. We have the billionaire class, the wealthy 1% class that is still there. That is still, I would assume, in this world, profiting off of people's labor and natural resources, right? So the people that have overthrown the government, right, dissolved all borders, are now auctioning off land to the people that need it, and how the necessities of the collective, right? Mm-hmm. They're just okay with these major holdings and fiefdoms, so to speak, of Jeff Bezos and is it Steve Wozniak, whatever his name is at Apple, right? Who's the Apple guy? Tim Cook. Yeah, that's it now. Thank you.
Tim Apple, as the president called him.
That's right. I forgot about that. Good callback, Gary. That was like 2017, right? That was a while ago. Way to go. Your memory.
And what's so funny is he just can't admit that he said it wrong. No, he's like, that's just my New York accent. No, he said Tim Apples. You couldn't make a joke of it. Yeah. He's the CEO of Apples. That's what I call him. I call him Timmy Apples. That's what we call it. Like, you just can't admit you made a mistake. Like, why is it that? Oh, did I call him that? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what we call each other.
So I mean, what they just coexist, this sort of collective group that is auctioning off the state and public land, right? And the private ownership of like Bezos. Like, you don't think the people would naturally want to also overthrow that sort of oppressive arm as well?
Look, if that's what they want, I mean, overthrow it how? Violently?
Well, I mean, Gary, I know like we like hit around it, but like how we do that internationally and like from abolishing the state, it would have to be violently, right?
Well, I declare myself independent. I'm not going to use any violence. If you use violence if you aggress me and say, no, you can't do that, I've lined up these people to stop you from doing that.
Okay. But Gary, I mean, in terms of like a real world, like upscaling this, right? Like you're talking about a true international movement, there would have to be you know what I mean? Like, come on, Gary. Like, you think like all these states is gonna be like, oh well, I mean, all these people are like, hey, we're independent now. They all said they're Spartacus, so it means that they're all Spartacus. Do you like? Is that's never existed?
Okay, like that doesn't mean that. And I said it's not realistically going to happen tomorrow. So what you have to do is just chip away, right? Just chip away at government regulation, chip away at taxing people, chip away at throwing people in jail for no reason. Just stop these things little by little, by little, by little, by little, by little, until people realize that the state works for us and I don't really need them.
Doesn't that seem a little bit unrealistic in terms of like actually dealing with the oppression of the state, let alone the oppression of the economic system that you're calling for, which tabling that, like the going back to the state idea. I mean, if this is an immediate issue, right? Like the state's bombing people in Yemen right now with their taxpayer dollars, right? Like the belief that we as a collective movement, right, to upskill this, right, that we can just sort of chip away at regulation here and there and it'll be fine. Like I just don't see how that actually abolishes the state internationally, where there's no borders globally and people are open to free and democratic association. Like that doesn't seem realistic.
That's the end game, right? I'm not saying that wouldn't realistically
no
happen overnight. Of course it would.
I understand that's the end game, because us Marxists have the same end game, right? We have the same aim as anarchists, except for the capitalism which you described. We would also overthrow Jeff Bezos as well. He gets the guillotine. But the strategic or tactical sort of steps to get there are completely different. From like a Marxist-Leninist perspective, we look at actual revolutions in history and what they have been able to achieve or not achieved, and we work from that. And we understand that innately, to overthrow the state, which is oppressive, it requires, especially the and this might be a distinction which we'll get to if you start having questions for me, right? I think this might be a good point where we switch a little bit. We do differentiate the state of the proletariat and the state of the bourgeoisie. Okay, the state of the bourgeoisie is, both of them are oppressive, right? I want to get that out of the way. Both are oppressive. Who they oppress and why they oppress them are completely different, right? But we do understand that the state has to be abolished, and the state of the bourgeoisie has to be violently revolted against. The state of the proletariat will just wither away, is the belief. And I don't know if you want me to get into that or any questions. I know you had like big questions for me, so Gary, floor is yours.
Okay, so if you abolish the state, so now you have, okay, so let's start here. You would have the workers, right? As a Marxist, you would have the workers controlling the means of production, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like,
and quickly, because I know that this might get we might get into this as well, and I just want to preemptively do it so there's not any sort of miscommunication here. From what I'm arguing from a Marxist-Leninist perspective, just for you listening, Gary, and for those listening as well. It's a very specific set of Marxism. Just want to make that clear. I'm not going to say I'm an expert on it, just that I've recently read some of Lenin's work and I've been fascinated by it. But the fuck, I forgot what I was going to say. Damn it, Gary. Damn it. I hate when that happens. The abolition of the state. You said something about that, and I forget what I was going to say to that. Damn it.
And you said one of the companies like Raytheon in Kazakhstan. We don't probably have a Raytheon because we don't bomb people, right? So if Raytheon probably goes out of business, or there probably is no Raytheon because there's no, once we finish, then we don't need Raytheon's products anymore. No offense to Raytheon.
I don't know about that being true, because I feel like if you have, again, from like a realistic perspective, you have these major military industrial sort of corporations, right? Private corporations. They will still want to make money.
Okay, all right, maybe you're right. I hadn't thought of that. That's true.
You would have to get rid of those pretty fast in terms of once you've abolished the state. But the abolishing of the state, I want to get to that in a second, or right now. Lenin, how to describe it? Lenin's belief in the abolition of the state is that is a, like I said, an aim goal. Lenin absolutely believes in the utilization of what the state has and what the state materially does in terms of functions to achieve communist goals, which would mean getting the means of production to a collective ownership. Right? Lenin would say that you can only do that through the oppressive force, or I forget the phrase, he used, like the special suppressive force, I think is the term he used, of the state. That the only way to get rid of individual private ownership of the degree we're talking about, like a Jeff Bezos, like the Walton family, you would have to be violent in order to deal with that. And that's just a reality in terms of revolutions. That revolutions are innately violent is something that Lenin would say. No. I jumped over your question, so I don't know if you want to go back to your question.
They very well could end up violence, but I'm not the one who's going to initiate the violence. I am going to defend myself, though. Like, I'm not going to start a fight, but I will finish it. Like, that's kind of my perspective on it.
The Marxists would state that we are already being treated violently.
I don't necessarily agree or disagree. Yes, I can certainly agree with that.
Like, we're starting at a state of violence is being conducted. We're reacting to it.
In libertarians, we call it the non-aggression principle. You're saying I've already been aggressed. You've already violated me. You've already aggressed upon me. Okay, fine. I can. That's fair. That's fair.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was your question about abolition?
So when you talk about abolition state, you have the workers controlling the means of production. So
I remember what I was going to say. God damn it! Thank you, Gary. Okay. I should just ask you to repeat that little part of the question. We do believe in organization. That's I'm gonna use the term representational, but it's not parliamentarian. And Lenin described it, and Marx and Engels also described this as well. So Lenin is using most of his framework off of Marx and Engels, and they all use their framework from the Paris Commune of 1871. So if anyone wants to do research on this, I think Marx's book or pamphlet, The Civil War in France, details this. I forget the name of Engels' work, and obviously Lenin's State and Revolution details this in depth in terms of the Paris Commune. But there was in the belief of Lenin and belief of Marx and Engels, you would have this communal setup that could be upscaled. And basically what it would be is a combination of the executive and legislative branch. You would have the representatives of every tier, of every position of what we would call the state, right? Though Lenin would say that once this process starts, it would no longer look like the state. He often says that this new state is not really a state, that it often is already changing and withering away as we speak. That every position within the government, state, the communes, as they're called, would be voted on. It would be universal suffrage. They at any point they could be recalled, and they had to be paid in what Lenin called working man's wages. So you cannot have a careerist out of the position. And the reason why you combine the legislative and executive branches, and Marx as well, and again off the Paris Commune system, is that it made their representatives have to do the work. They believe that the modern parliamentarian system was just a big, I forget the way they described it, but like a room to talk in and just, bullshit in basically and not actually get things done. And it was a way to just placate the working class and oppressed class because, hey, look, we're talking about the issues. Meanwhile, the executive branch is not doing anything. Their belief and the Marxist belief would be that you would have to make your representatives, one, completely subject to you and your wishes, the collective wishes, right, of the commune, of the people that vote them in. And that at any time, if we don't like what they do, we can recall them instantaneously. And there's other passages that allude to this, that major sort of rules or regulations, whatever they have be, would be outside the commune's purview. That would be up to the universal suffrage of the people. So there is a system of organization. I want to make that clear, that is separate from just worker ownership of the means of production. That
in your society, are there small businesses? Like, is there there are. Okay,
yeah,
so
they would also be collectively owned. So let's say it's you, Sally, and Jimmy run the shop, right? You three can dictate collectively, democratically, if that company has to move locations, if your company has to get different products. Like, there is some sort of egalitarian nature to the economic functions and setup.
So if there's a small business that me and you own,
yeah,
we're controlling the means of production, while the CFO of Apple. See, like in America, we don't have a legal term for worker. We just call it employee. Like, there's no legal term worker. It's called an employee, right? So the CFO of Apple or Amazon or Raytheon is an employee, right? So you're saying, you know what I'm saying? If we own a pizza shop, we own a widget factory, like a small little widget factory, we are controlling the means of production for the widget factory, right? But you don't think that we're the ones that are taking over the world. But you say the workers, you know what I'm saying? Like, right. I'm confused on, like, okay, you're saying workers, but the term employee, the CFO of Apple is an employee, right? He's a worker, even though he makes millions of dollars a year, probably has $1 billion in stock options, right? And can do basically what he wants. That person is way more powerful than the guy that owns a pie shop down the road, is he not? So
okay, no, I understand. No. I would not worry about having to stick to that distinction of, like, our legalistic terms of, like, employee versus independent contract, like, or an owner. Like, I wouldn't worry about that, to be honest. I think we can supersede that, because first off, I think most people are quite aware of that. Again, Jimmy down the street that owns the pizzeria is very different than, you know, Timmy Apples, right? At Apple, like, who is an employee, right? I think we understand that the control of the means of production for a CFO of Apple is very different than the control of productions for an owner of pizzeria. Both have some control, obviously, of the owner of the means of production, right? And the nature of the inequality between the one that owns the means of production, the one that works within the means of production, is far different than, obviously, the pizzeria and Apple, right?
Right.
I think we can reconcile that, and it's not a big deal. Like, for example, like if you're asking, like, how would a Marxist deal with an Apple? I don't know if that's really what your question is, versus how we deal with a small business. I would say both have to be collectively owned, but for the major corporation, you would have to, in some fashion, within that corporation, enact policies through voting, through, you know, democratic means, of limiting the CFO's pay, of limiting that inequality. So the one that's working at the sweatshop is able to live and have their necessities met, right? Because right now that's not happening, right? There's people working in the sweatshops in Taiwan don't have their necessities met, right? Tim Cook is it Tim Cook? Tim Apple? Whatever.
Timmy Apples.
Timmy Apples. He has 15 houses, right? So, like, it's, I think the Marxists would say that CFO, first off, if it's Timmy Apples, he probably is not going to be around anymore in this situation, just being honest, in terms of, like, the Leninist perspective. I don't think Timmy Apples is going to make it through this transitionary period. This doesn't seem likely. If he does, I don't think he's going to have the ownership of the means of production anymore. You know what I mean? Like, that's just fundamentally how it is. And obviously, I think, to be honest, and this is something I've seen a few people within the Marxist community start talking about, and I think we should just be honest about it to a degree. The mass production scale we see with capitalism might not exist in a communist society, but that might be okay, right? Like the drawbacks of these massive multinational corporations that by default kind of need to extrapolate resources and labor from people, right? In a predatory nature, those systems might not exist, where we might have far more localized systems of production, and that might be okay. It might not be as efficient. You might not get your Amazon delivery in the mail the next day, but if everyone's needs are met, if everyone, is taken care of, then I don't think it really matters, to be honest.
But like, so, okay, then that kind of takes me to my ultimate question, right? Like, in society, there's no billionaires, right? There's no billionaires, or are there?
I mean, I've heard some, and this is, again, I'm going to separate from the Marxist-leninist point of view. I've seen social democrats argue that there can be. Marxist-leninism would first off say that social democrats aren't Marxist at all, and they're opportunist. And I would probably somewhat agree with that as well. And I would probably agree with Lenin not stating explicitly that no billionaires would exist, but most likely no. Like that probably wouldn't be the nature, because that type of capital accumulation would exist collectively. So when we talk about the Len Blavatsky's of the world, right, having $40 billion of wealth, that much wealth would be deviated and separated out through all of those holdings he has, all those companies. Imagine all the people that work under him all the way down. If that 40 billion was, collectively distributed to meet people's needs, I don't think we would have billionaires, to be honest.
All right. So, okay, fine. So there's like basically two things, right? So is that money equally distributed, or is there still a level of hierarchy where the boss makes X, then below him, the new guy that got hired last week makes Y, the guy that cleans the floor makes Z, or is it equally distributed throughout?
I've obviously heard a varying degree of answers to that, to be honest, within the Marxist, communist, anarchist circles. I just want to point that out. I've heard both answers from the traditional, like Engels, Marx, what they would argue, and even Lenin to agree. They would admit that like some form of authority exists in very small cases. And the example that Engels used was ships. Like, would you not have ship captains anymore? Would you not have people that have expertise on navigation that are the one controlling the radar? Like, he brought in like a kind of a very specific example, which I think you would like, a hypothetical, right? Like, how would a communist society on a ship work? You would kind of need some sort of authority to get stuff done there. And I would say in that sense, and also, and from what I've heard from a lot more academic Marxists, you would have some difference in pay that would exist. Okay. It wouldn't be the extreme nature. You wouldn't have CEO pay being like what 340 something to 1 compared to the worker pay right now, right?
And it wasn't like that up until probably the 90s. I mean, it progressively grew and grew, but
absolutely. And that's only in America. Like if we're talking about like British economic inequality, you're talking about the 19th century, that very much mirrors.
I'm sure it exists in the oil empires in the Middle East too, right? I'm sure it's not in the Western world. It's probably only America, right? I mean, I'm sure the oil kingpins
and the only reason we saw that is because we had a lot of Keynesian economic policies from FDR from 1930 something, 1933 or 34 to roughly 1970 something. I forget is when the exact year where we saw productivity skyrocket for U.S. Workers and production, but wage stagnate. It was around like the late 1970s, I believe. Jimmy Carter's administration, I want to say, is when that happened.
Like my wife's grandfather, so whatever that makes him to me, was a CEO of a major conglomerate. Mm-hmm. And it made a lot of money. Nothing compared to what it would have made now. You know what I'm saying? Like not even in the ballpark, right? Like a fraction. But he's still, even at that point, made a lot of money. But
Oh,
instead
yeah.
of making $30 million a year, he probably made two.
And workers were paid a lot more, or
Workers were paid a lot more.
at least I'd say workers were far more unionized back then as well.
Workers were more unionized, and to the cost of living, they were paid a lot more, right? Like if typically back then, if you took the average worker's salary, buying a house would be 3 times the salary, right? So if you made 30 grand, a house was 90. Now it's like 10 times, right? So the average worker, they were paid more relative to the cost of living at the time.
Yes.
Back
then. Any questions, Gary? Any more questions?
Okay, so and there's still competition, right? Like there's not, because there's no state, so we're free to open businesses as we choose. If you want to open up a widget factory right next to a different widget factory, what if I want your workers? I can pay them more, right? If I want to take your workers, I want to hire. I started a widget factory next to your widget factory. I like the way you make widgets. How much do you make? X an hour. I want to pay you X plus 5 an hour. Come work for me. I can still do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about like pre abolition of money, right? Of that, and again, we're not gonna get into that because that's probably something that I think we both need some reading on. Let's be honest. But yeah, I think obviously yes. But the difference is that like that business you're talking about that like you're not the one like making all the decisions. It's collectively the group making the decisions, right?
Okay.
So in terms of who's brought on, who gets hired, what the produce gets sold to, like that all gets more democratically decided on, and not from like a state of a board of directors sort of democratic way of thinking. It's everyone has a say in that company.
And the same works for land. Land ownership is communal too.
Yes, very much how you would envision like federal and state, and how like that transitionary period, right, where the people own federal and state land in your anarcho-capitalist society. Take that for all land. Yes.
All right. So
further.
And so if there's a oil field or a diamond mine that just land that's organically worth a lot of money, right? Just the land itself is valuable beyond belief. That's all divided up amongst everyone, or just the people who live there? Because just the people who live in that particular plot, or what, you know what I'm saying? Because that land is going to be worth more than some rocky land 100 miles away. Just
Absolutely.
Organically, that land's worth a lot more.
I mean, to use your hypothetical of like this is an international world now, we're in this hypothetical, right, where like the entire world is set up in this organization, right? We've got past that violent period, or that revolutionary period. I'll say not violent, the revolutionary period, to appease you, Gary. There would be some sort of centralized commune, because Marxism is not anti-centralism. And there's a passage I can get to if you want that's really interesting about that. So imagine like the centralized commune in this society, in this world society, right? Every commune, and from every level, like even Engels talks about like he uses the term hamlet, right? Obviously in the 19th century, any hamlet can have a commune. So from the ground up, they were saying sort of the national, they referred to national because they were still speaking in nation state sense, right? Sent to the national representative body, the national commune. Imagine it now being international commune. That representative is obviously directly adherent to the commune they came from and the people that elected them. So it's the same setup all the way from the ground up. So let's say that profitable land, right, of natural resources. I don't want to use oil because I think that we need to get past oil. That's from like a separate argument, right? But I just think that we need to get past oil.
We're never going to agree on that. And I got too much money wrapped up in oil. We're never going to agree on that.
Well, again, you understand it from a capitalistic perspective of corporations and the need for oil, and you're absolutely right. I think capitalism and how corporations and private ownership work, absolutely, it would be very hard to get off of fossil fuels because there's major profit in it. So why get away from that? But a communist society would not work off of profit. That's not the end goal of a communist society. Its end goal is the needs are the people be met, right? So let's say just a naturally rich land, right, in terms of resources, just X resource. It doesn't have to matter it could be water, it could be anything, right? And let's say that is under the jurisdiction of one commune in this location, right? And there's a commune right next to it that doesn't have naturally rich land, that can't farm as well, whatever it may be, right? You would absolutely have some sort of first off, interaction between these two parties, these two communes. You would have some sort of interaction from the international level, because you would have representatives that are talking, that are communicating, and plus actually enacting policy and on the ground actually pushing the policy forward as being the executive as well. So you would have, I would assume, a debate on the international commune about the resources of this land that are more than they need be used to the commune right next door because they need it. In this communist society, people would understand that, yes, that the needs of the people need to be met. We have more than we need. We can give it to them. They're right next door. I think it wouldn't be that much of an issue in terms of how these systems are set up.
Okay. All right. So you were saying the workers get, I don't know, if a worker's wage or a prevailing wage or whatever you called it.
No, I said Lenin described, because this was before like the abolition of like wage labor like really became in vogue, to be honest. Lenin described politicians, right? Or like not politicians, because it wouldn't be the same sense. But the people within the commune, the representatives we elect, right? We can use politicians if we want. They will have a working man's wage. So like whatever you get paid at your pizzeria, your representative in your commune cannot get paid more than you.
Boy, I like that idea. Like they can't make more than the average wage of the district they represent. Boy, I like that idea. Boy, I really like that idea.
I knew you would like that one. And plus, I love the idea of just like universal callbacks, like, or not universal. What would be the right term? Unlimited callbacks? No, what would be the right term? I don't know. Unrestricted callback, where like at any point you in your community, your society can go, no, we don't like that guy representing us in our own commune or their national commune. We vote, he's out of there. We elect somebody else.
Boy, I like that too.
At any point.
I like that too. I don't know why that.
And Lenin described this, and he used it off of Engels, to be honest. He used a lot of his points in this discussion, in that subject from Engels. That was their version of getting away from parliamentarianism, because they viewed, again, parliamentarianism and federalism as well as innately bourgeois, like innately bourgeoisie, innately systems of the powerful and the ruling class. And these simple steps, one being that the legislators have to be the executives as well. You can call them back at any time and they cannot get paid more than you, would be easy ways to eliminate parliamentarianism as we know it.
And then what would you do about barter, right? Like I live on the oil land. I have oil. I dug it up. I drilled it. I want to trade it. Can I trade my oil, what's on my land or this land, this communal's land? Can we trade it with other communities?
When it comes to natural resources, it would have to be collectively decided on with, let's say, the commune. I would probably say let's say if you're the only one, it's not like a business. You found the natural resource, right? But you still live within this commune, of course. The commune would decide, do we keep it? Do we give it to someone else? Do we trade? How do we set this up? And I mean, let's say it's like a very bountiful natural resource in some fashion, right? Naturally, that community would prosper in some fashion from that. You as well. You know what I mean? Like it's the thought of like rising tide raises all ships. That is very innately a communist perspective.
So, like, but I'm saying if I have the diamonds on my plot of land, I can barter them.
But see, the land, that's the issue. The land is collectively owned.
Right. Our commune has all the diamonds.
Yes.
Okay. So we split it up between us.
Yes.
Right. We split up all the diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
We're way more rich than the people who have rocks. You know what I'm saying? Because we have these diamonds, we can trade with other communes that they'll give us, that they'll exchange.
But you're in connection with these other communes. Like there's a sinew of connection between you guys. But it's not like you are autonomous bodies, so to speak, where your commune can act irregardless of the your neighbor commune's needs, right? You would still be adherent to the international commune, the collective body, right? We're talking about we're talking about this being international world like society, right? We're still under your hypothetical, right? So absolutely, if your very isolated commune, or not isolated commune, just a commune is enacting in a way that is greedy and predatory in any way, then it would be in some fashion subject to the international commune and the communes around it as well.
Okay, so then, like,
I'm assuming you're gonna ask about like how would you deal with that in terms of force? How do you deal with that commune that's in a sense rebelling towards the authority, right? The people would be armed. Like that would be Lenin's thought, that everyone's armed. Like everyone has guns.
I like that idea too.
So like
I like that idea.
Lenin's against the military as a whole, as like as an institution, because that he views that as another tool of the ruling class and a ruling class as well.
Yep.
Right. But if everyone's armed, then it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
So it's sort of his view on it.
I agree with that view 100. I mean,
so let's say like your commune. We're going back to your hypothetical, right? Your commune's hoarding the natural resource, right? Mm-hmm. Well, fuck, every other commune right next to you is as armed as you. You're the only commune that doesn't feel, that is kind of going against the wishes of the collective. I think most likely a lot of those armed conflicts you would see, that sort of like territorial armed conflicts over resources, would get resolved because everyone's armed and everyone's subject to the will of the collective in a sense, because everyone's armed. So like your little tiny commune would be like, fuck, we got like commune over there, commune over there, commune over there. They all pissed off at us right now. We got the international body sending us memos every fucking hour saying like, hey, what are you going to do here, man? This isn't what we agreed on. This isn't what our sort of constitution, if you want to use that American term, right? Our constitution as a collective was built on. That would be, I think, sort of the answer to that problem.
So is there any private land ownership at all?
And like do
you own your home and your property?
There's a difference between personal property and private property. And I'll be honest, I'm not, this is like, we're like you, like, I don't know enough on the distinctions to like really answer that. I know that there is a distinction between personal and private property within Marxist understanding.
I've been driving around for 6 hours and I'm tired and I want to take a nap. Can I just roll up in your house and say, hey, this is our house, and then just go walk in your house and fall asleep on your couch for a couple hours?
No, okay. I would say that it's not private ownership. I forget again. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for on you. I'll say this: the next debate show we have, I will absolutely study it for that answer or that question, I should say, and have an answer for it that's better than this, because I don't know the theory behind it, the science behind it from a Marxist perspective as well as I should. But I know that there is a difference. So then, like, okay. And again, I don't have answers to everything. You're going to ask me questions.
And
to be honest, I want to say the separation from what I vaguely remember is that like private ownership is often, when we talk about, I don't know if it's the right term, but like commercial use, sort of like the economic use of land or a building or a factory, whatever that is, that cannot be privately owned. Right. But a house is not a tool of production usually, especially from a 19th century perspective. Now, maybe that's far different in our modern 2020 where everyone's working at home now.
Everyone working at home, you can rent your home out on Airbnb, things like that. You can use your home to make money.
Renting probably wouldn't exist at the very end, though I do believe there was a passage in State and Revolution about renting, actually. The idea that there would be some renting in this intermediary period before before the state withers away. But I forget exactly how he described it. But yes, I think at the end goal, renting wouldn't be a thing, because that would be turning a house, sort of like a building, into a factory in a sense.
Which is what I'm trying to get at, but that's for another discussion. That there are always going to be innovative people who want more, who are going to find a way to make it, who are going to try to find a way to make more money, just like a drug. You can ban drugs all you want. An addict is still going to get it. People who want more money are still going to find a way to get it.
No, absolutely. But you do want to create a overall system that does not only reward those people, because our current system only rewards people that want to get ahead, people that are greedy, people that are innately predatory. Look at the leaders of our Fortune 500 companies. Look at the leaders of our state. I mean, people that get ahead do seem to be innately oppressive in what they want to do, how they sort of present themselves, their material goals. It seems, right, Gary?
What about people? I mean, you can call it greed, and this is, I mean, but greed obviously has a negative connotation to it, right? And it's not good to be greedy, and I agree with that. What about people who are just motivated by fear of failure? I just don't want to fail, and I made $1 million because I don't ever want to be homeless. Like, I'm just motivated. I motivated by refusal to fail. Like, I'm afraid to, if I stop working for 1 minute, that I'm gonna lose all of it.
I don't really understand the question, to be honest.
Like, you're like, and it's not really related. This is just saying, like, you're saying people are driven by greed. Well, what about?
I'm not saying overall people are driven by greed. I want to make that clear. Like, I don't think human nature is one of greed. I'll be honest.
Okay, then forget it. Then my question's irrelevant. Then okay.
I think the people that get ahead in our society right now are those people that are greedy. People that their nature is the one where they want to give me, right? They want to take everything, right?
What if it's not that? What if it's just a fear, a paranoia of failing that drives me?
Gary, do you think everyone in Congress or people like that are CEOs of major multi-million and billion-dollar companies, do you think those people are driven by fear of failure or the wants of accumulation? The wants of
most is a want of accumulation. Most, okay, for sure.
Yeah. The 5% that are just fearful of failure, I don't feel like that.
I don't think it's definitely minority. I don't think it's as small as minority as you think.
I don't think it like really matters, if that makes sense. I don't mean to like to dismiss your question, but like I don't understand like how like in a common society, like people that don't want to fail will feel like they're failing. Like I don't get that. You know what I mean?
The safety of everyone. Okay.
Yeah,
you're kind of eliminating
because that person will not feel like they're about to fail, because the fear of failing is the idea that you're about to be poor, right? You're about to go into poverty, you're about to be homeless. Those things wouldn't exist. So like that innate fear wouldn't happen. And to be honest, there's a I forget what the phrase is, but basically Marx talks about this, that our generation, right? Let's imagine like the international revolution happens now, right? And we are the generation that's in the middle of that process, of the intermediary process from capitalism to communism, right? We will always sort of be hearkened to state apparatuses and hierarchies because we're so ingrained with it. Even Marx talks about that. Like, it's so hard for us to get away from natural hierarchies that we think are natural because that's just how we're raised, right? But the next generation that comes after us, that lives after that intermediary period, they will have a very different outlook on life. They would be a very different people than us, Marx talks about, because what they will be raised on is a society where that fear is not a rampant fear, right? Like the fear of failure is in, I think, everyone to a degree, right? I don't think that's a innately like CEO level feeling, right? Like I think like everyone is fearful of failure due to bad things happening if you fail, right? But if a lot of those economic pitfalls of failing in terms of economics is taken away, then what are people like in that world? People will be radically different, Marx will say. That like the empathy people will have would be drastically different because they will only know that society. I don't think it's, obviously 100% true. I think you're, again, to some degree, like the one out of how many people are sociopaths. Like, you're still going to have like a little bit of that, obviously, to a degree, but it is interesting to think about like what happens when like people are like children are born and raised in society where like that fear of failure isn't preeminent in everyone, where it doesn't exist. And I would say that in a communist society, we achieve that. We can achieve that. We have material, historical, scientific data to look at when it comes to the 1871 commune, the 1917 Russian Revolution. We can look at and detail the pitfalls of them and course correct. But an anarcho-capitalist society, sort of like a last sort of final thought here, right, Gary? That society will never get away of that fear of failure, because poverty will always exist. Extreme poverty will always exist in a capitalist society, even if you get rid of the state. The subordination of the masses will still exist because you have individual ownership, and the individual ownership of the means of production will always, from a Marxist perspective, will always be held by the tiny minority. That's just how it is.
Right. So, like, in any society, there are also people. There are always people who are just would be physically disabled. Mm-hmm. I don't want to try to be mean, but mentally deficient, right? Like mentally handicapped people who can't
like work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But in my society, in a voluntary society, they're still voluntarily helped and funded by people, right? Like they're still taken care of. They're not left to die because we're human beings, and that's why my society still needs to be a moral people, right?
You don't think Jeff Bezos would leave mentally handicapped people to die?
Jeff Bezos absolutely would. Jeff Bezos leaves his workers to die, but the rest of us don't. I mean, like you said, there's always that 1% sociopath in the society.
But most of you do not have that extreme wealth. Most people don't. Most people don't have the ownership of the means of production, but like those 6 corporations that own 90% of.
I'm not saying that these people are going to live in the lap of luxury, right? But someone put it in the group chat that kid in Kenosha, Wisconsin, I think it's Kenosha, Wisconsin, just got $3 million or something in GoFundMe. What I'm saying is people are voluntarily willing to help anyone, right? So what I'm saying is your fellow man will help you. Like you see it all the time. In Texas, we had that girl, Sally Luther, who opened up her hair salon in Dallas. And the next day she had $500,000 in a GoFundMe. It just, people will help you.
Gary, why don't we create a system where we don't need the individual whims of rich people to help us?
But it's not rich people. It's people chipping in $50, $100, $20.
Gary, people like that filth in Kenosha, okay? He's getting big money from big donors. You know it. I mean, come on. And we talk about GoFundMes. GoFundMes are not like GoFundMes, I think, are an example of how awful capitalism is, not how great capitalism is. What are you talking about?
Why is that?
That people are so poor from this system that they need to ask people to give them money to help with medical diseases and such, when we should just have systems that help people. Like, we collectively create a system that helps everyone. So where people don't have to beg for handouts from individuals, we collectively take care of the weakest of us. We don't do that now. And in capitalism, that would never happen because it doesn't happen, hasn't happened, will never happen. Capitalism is not built on the helping of the needy. It's built on the extrapolation for profit.
Why is America like the most generous country in the history of the world as far as charity goes? I'm not saying it's the most capitalistic, but it's one of the most capitalistic countries in the world. Why is it the most generous country in the history of the world?
Gary, would you really describe America as the most generous country in the world?
By look at the amount of people who donate to charitable. Let's define that term, right? The amount of people who donate charitable donation and the percentage of their income that they donate. Yeah, like
Gary, but that doesn't get rid of the extreme economic inequality that we see, where the top 1% owns more wealth and have stolen more wealth from the bottom 90%. Okay? I mean, I don't know if you read that article from Time Magazine that came out a few months ago that greatly detailed how the top 1% stole $50 trillion from the bottom 90% over the last 40 years.
How did that? But what do you mean by they stole it? Explain like how they stole it. And I bet you they use government to do it. My society doesn't have government.
But Gary, capitalism innately was started by the state. Are you really thinking that if we get rid of the state, capitalism would not just become the state and still you would have Pinkertons instead of the military? Like, capitalism and companies and corporations have been just as violent as the state.
No,
because look at chattel slavery. That was all allowed through monopolized corporations.
No, it's allowed through government, right? Chattel slavery is allowed through government, right? Like, without the government, if you say I own you, you're my slave, and I run away, someone has to return me. That person returning me saying I belong to you is government.
Gary, okay, the West Indies Company, when it went and started the slave trade on behalf of the Portuguese Empire, right? Just because the Portuguese Empire asked for that didn't mean that the West Indies Company didn't want to do it. They asked for it, okay? The idea that you get rid of the state and a corporation would be empathetic is ridiculous, when in fact most corporations are the reasons we have such draconian laws, such oppressive laws, such predatory laws. Okay, the reason why we have nonstop wars in the Middle East is not from the state per se; it's from corporations on behalf of the state requesting it.
That's the worst combination of things. I've always said the state and corporations work together is the worst possible scenario.
If you abolish the state and you just have these massive capitalist corporations that exist, they will in fact become states.
But you also wouldn't have corporations, because corporations are set up for tax purposes, right? Corporations exist on two pieces of paper to pay taxes, right? They call themselves corporations for tax reasons. Without any taxes, you don't have corporations. You can have big businesses, right? That may exist still. That would exist.
Okay,
because it's provide products that people want.
Gary, I mean, that's a very semantical argument. I feel like that's pointless. Big business, okay? You're still going to have Apple. You're still going to have Amazon. You're still going to have these massive dominions of wealth by a ruling class that now is unrestricted to oppress and to exploit people.
Except they can't express and they can't exploit people because all the transactions are voluntary. No one's forced to do anything, right? It's a completely voluntary society.
But Gary, capitalism innately is not voluntary.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that. As long as we're talking about free markets and we're not talking about some type of fusion of the state and
whatever you're talking about, free market has never, will never, and does not exist.
It exists in small. It exists in small segments all over the world.
And then what you're talking about is not free market. It's not what Adam Smith were talking about. It's not what what's his name from fucking Reagan's administration. Fuck.
No, Milton Friedman.
No, not Milton Friedman. The other guy. But you're right. Milton Friedman would do that too. God, who's another guy? Is Howard something? Howard
Hazlitt?
No.
Economics in one lesson.
I'll remember. I'll send it to you later. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. We can use Milton Friedman. It doesn't matter. I forget what we're talking about, to be honest. In terms of exact points, the free market that you talk about in these isolated cases of bartering is, I think, what you really want to talk about, and like the free exchange of goods through voluntary and free association. That is innately not capitalistic. It isn't. I mean, you can if you want to call it free market, that's fine. But free market is often only used in connection with capitalism. You understand that, right? Like, it's colloquially used. Like when you say, like, I won't use free capitalism, I use free market. You're saying the same thing.
I agree. But when I say when I say I'm using capitalism, I'm using like the basic first grade Investopedia textbook definition of the word of individual owning the means.
But the individual owning the means of production is a hierarchy of oppression.
I disagree with that. You own your land, I own my land.
But Gary, you act like that is a very equal reality when that's not the reality.
Me owning more than you It doesn't oppress you.
No. It's not just that, Gary. I mean, if you like, do you have you ever like really? I don't mean to like be like condescending. If I sound that way, I'm not. Okay, Gary.
I got thick skin. I'll be all right.
You're talented. You could be right. Like, have you really researched like the creation of capitalism?
Not so much.
I would if I was you. To be honest. I think it's important to understand the nature of capitalism because you cannot separate the creation of capitalism with its nature, in my opinion. I think that would be a historical way of looking at things. Okay. The creation of capitalism was not through free association. It was not through just someone owning more land. It was through the direct goal of making the overall populace subordinate to a ruling class even more. It was a way of separating political and economic coercion. Because in feudalism, right? Let's say you're a farmer in the land, you're towing your whatever, right? Your fields, your wheat. You give a local fee to the lord, right? But you most likely kept the surplus. Actually, that's usually how it existed.
We still have that in what do they call it? Continue. Crop farmers, like
But anyways,
share farmers.
The way that wealth was taken from farmers was through political coercion. It was from the knights and the lords coming in with swords and shit, and lopping off heads if they didn't get the local taxes. Right? That's what it was. Capitalism was the separation of that. It was the ability to create a new class of people that was separate from the lords. Okay, it was an economic, industrial, bourgeoisie class, is what the Marxists would say, right? It was the people that would basically buy or be given often lower lords, dukes, their cousins, whatever, when the communes were or the enclosures of the communes happened, meaning free land, free forest that was used for lumber, hunting, sort of agrarian nature. It was free to use, right? When that land was enclosed, it was taken by a new class of people, and that class of people made the poor that used to hunt on that land, used to farm on that land freely, work for a very low wage that made them subservient to that lord. And that's where you get sort of, in truest sense, like wage slavery, because they were paid so little they had to live on the farms. It was very much like chattel slavery, except they were paid very low wages. Okay.
I would say any involuntary work, even paid or not, is slavery, right? Like if you're forcing me to do it just because you gave me money, right? If the option is violence, if I don't do it, then that's slavery.
But Gary, let's say I'm that hunter that used to hunt on that land, right? And now it's enclosed. They put fences around it. I have to go to this local.
Who put fences around it?
Again, it was local lords, and then they basically sold off the land to like cousins.
Not on my property.
That's what happened. But
not
again,
on my property, we got a saying in Texas: "Come and take it." Now you're not doing it on my property. Try it.
Walmart already took most of the land in Texas, so it's okay.
They bought it. They bought it. They bought it.
Oh,
massive.
Yeah.
There's massive Walmarts all over the place. Like I can't.
Yeah. And so those initial sort of workers under capitalism, right? They were either forced to starve and die, or work on the land they used to be freely able to go on. Okay. And that scenario has not changed. That dynamic has not fundamentally changed since then, regardless of the state. Okay. Because again, it quickly became just tenant farmers. I mean, very quickly, within 100 years, it just became tenant farmers that paid wage laborers to farm the land. And that became the bourgeoisie class.
Sharecroppers is what I was trying to think of before, which I couldn't think of. But that I don't advocate that, right? Because
No,
that's not based on voluntary transaction. You
I,
took my land,
I,
right,
I,
and then made me work on it. That's not. If that's what you want to call capitalism, I don't support that. That's not what I'm supporting.
but that's the foundation of capitalism. That's the nature of capitalism. When we talk about the founding of our country, right, to sort of bring it, more home, right, and also a little bit closer. After the Revolutionary War, when you had all that open land to the west, right, and sort of the Appalachian states, right, that could be settled, right, that was now ours in a sense. There was a big discussion about whether that land should be publicly owned and given to people to go and settle on, right? Or would it be privately owned by the Virginia company, I think Virginia something company, right? Which was owned by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and is it Richard Lee? Is the ancestor to Robert E. Lee? No, you're in the South. You should know this. Alexander Lee. What's his name?
That doesn't sound right. Alex Lee. No, that doesn't sound right.
That's not right.
That's not right.
But that was a big discussion, and what happened? All that land became privately owned by the Virginia Company, and it was sold off to corporations and sold off to people as well. But it was privately owned. Okay, this sort of foundation of capitalism, whether it be within our country or from the foundings of capitalism, is rooted in its nature. This need to take away what should be commonly owned to the people into private singular ownership to create an economic hierarchy to where you force people to come pay you. If you want to go live on that land, you got to pay me. You want to come work on the land, you got to come pay me.
But you didn't acquire that land voluntarily, so that's not what I'm advocating for.
I understand that, Gary, but that is the nature of it. I know that's not what you're advocating for, but that's the nature of capitalism because that's the creation of capitalism. So when you talk about if we go to your sort of paradise, right, with this, international revolution, right, that's why I just don't understand why you would still have this view. I feel like because it's quite obvious that the people, if they're revolting in this way, they would also want to take down the hierarchies of the economy as well, which for a lot of people are more day-to-day oppressive, because if I don't work, I can't afford to live, I can't afford food, I die. So working is not voluntary. You have to work in our society, or you die, or
unless you inherit money, right? I mean, unless you inherit it or gamble it or
I'm talking about
right. But
yeah, yes. The working class. The working class has to work, because to not work means you cannot sustain yourself, because the means of living and the means of production are privately owned. That's all. That's my rant.
So, and this will have to be like the topic for the next discussion, because I got to wrap this up in the next couple of minutes.
Me too.
So like there's two things. I think there's a third party you're not looking at here, and that's the consumer of the product, right? Economies are grown by the innovation of new product, right? The computer, the car, like the car allowed us to go out and work away from home, right? Farming equipment allowed people to not have to farm, right? The farming economy went from 90% of the population in the 1800s to now 2% of the population, right? And my question is, where does that innovation come from, if not the profit model? Like where does that, if not for profit, where does the innovation, where does the motivation to innovate, where does that come from?
I would say that it already doesn't really come from the profit model, to be honest. I know maybe you might push back on this, and it's because I think we both don't agree with the system, right? But think about how these private corporations are given massive government subsidies, right? They're given massive, when we pay for governmental research and development, that gets sold off to private enterprise, right? But I think already we see in a very, twisted way, because obviously it's connected to capitalism and it's connected to our modern state. But we already see this sort of way of collectivizing wealth through taxation, and how that gets funneled into research and development to create innovation. The only issue is that research and development that creates innovation gets sold off to private enterprise, which then, jumps the price up by, a significant percentage. Look at Big Pharma. And I think Big Pharma is a perfect example, because a lot of that medicine, a lot of the the vaccines we're going to get is built off of government funding in a way, public funding, right? If you want to use that term even better, it's off of public funding. So I think in a communist society, you would still have the innovation we see now. The difference is that that innovation will not be handed off to a very small minority to be made for profit over the majority. Right? When we talk about innovative science that will help humanity, that should not be then profitized in any way by private corporations. Like that's innately wrong. And so I would kind of just reject the premise a little bit. I don't think that innovation is one best exampled by the profit system. And two, I don't think our system is even an example of that. I think our system is actually the example of the opposite, where we see many more cases where, like I think if you've already kind of mentioned, where a lot of these private enterprises kind of need government funding in a way. And so I would say that no, I think we got innovation already down. We just handed off to the wrong people. Ran off on people that would then use that innovation against us in some fashion, or to use innovation against or over us and make us pay for it when we have already paid for it through taxation.
Okay. But the iPhone changed the way we live our day-to-day lives. Like my whole life is on my phone.
That was through government subsidies. Not the first Apple computer, but iPhone. That was definitely through government subsidies.
I don't know, how is the iPhone through government? What kind of government?
I mean,
but it was through government subsidies, right? But it's not like the president said, "I'm going to have an iPhone committee and I'm going to regulate and make everyone make an iPhone," right? Like somebody had a really good idea. Steve Jobs had a really good idea. And he said, "I want to make $1 billion, and here's my product." Yeah, he got government handouts we shouldn't have got. I agree with that. But this was not made because government regulated to go make a phone.
He would never make that without the funding of the government, though. Like he would never have the means to make that without the funding of the government. Would be
why not?
Because well, how could he? I mean, he lived in his like parents' garage when he got the idea off of acid. You think like when like he had that idea, he could have just all of a sudden just made iPhones in Taiwan.
The laptop was made in a dorm room at the University of Texas. Like why couldn't?
Sorry, I got the location wrong, but it was off an acid. You know what I mean? Like it's not like he could go and then he had a factory to go to right then and there to make an iPhone. He had to get money from someone, some private investors,
investors. Right? Those things are all possible without the government. Those things are all possible. Like people get small business loans all the time. People get large business loans all the time. People hedge money all the time.
My point was not defending government. My point was the idea of collectivizing funding and wealth to create innovation. That already happens. It happens through the government apparatus to then hand off the innovation to private enterprise. Okay. I would argue you get rid of those two institutions. Like we are the ones already funding the innovation. So let's say it's Steve Jobs, to use that example, right? Steve Jobs would have a company that was collectively owned, and if he wanted to, and if he wanted the funding for it, he would get the funding from the commune, and boom, it'd be over.
And what happens if he fails? What if he makes a product that's no good that nobody wants?
I don't think anyone would buy it. Like the Zune was.
So how do the investors that gave them money get their money back?
Sometimes you don't make your money back. Profit margin wouldn't be the primary mode there. It would be innovation. Like innovation would be the primary goal, not making a profit. It would be actual innovation. We want to create a tool to help society. That would be the goal, not to make money off of that tool. And that already happened. We already have that. When we take, again, like when we take government money to a research lab, like Walter Reed to work on a vaccine or whatever bullshit, right? That vaccine is worked on through innovation, and the primary goal is to help society and help people, but then it's handed off to private enterprise to make it into a profit margin.
Yeah, and my
innately wrong.
Okay, my argument would be without that profit margin, no one does anything to make. No one goes and makes that drug or that vaccine or that, because there's no motivation to do it.
But we collectively would make that profit You understand? Like the profit margin wouldn't be isolated to an individual. So like, let's say like iPhones, right? Like let's say like the iPhone wasn't created somehow in this society, right? And we're in communes, we're an international society, and that's a communist society, right? And the iPhone gets created, right? Like the commune that let's say that created, or the company that created that's collectively owned, they would definitely make money on it. It's not like they wouldn't rake in, but the primary goal would never be only to profitize. It would be, first off, we collectively agreed to make this product, not just one individual. And two, collectively, we decide what to do with the profits. Not that hard. I don't feel like this is a hard issue.
No,
it already kind of happened, but we give it off to people like Jeff Bezos and people that work at big pharma companies that shouldn't be people that have this money, that have this power. The CEOs that control insulin products, like those people should not be giving the collectivized wealth to innovate, right? But that happens. So like I would argue that we already see in some fashion collectivizing labor and wealth to create innovation. We just hand off the innovation to the wrong people, and we don't get a profit off of it.
Who decides who's the right and wrong people?
The people. So it'd be
the
like,
consumer. Yeah? No.
Wait.
I mean, you're saying we're giving
in terms of the profit, right? Well, like if I'm Apple and we're collectively own the society, right? We create the iPhone, we're selling it, and we're making money. We within the company can collectively decide where that money goes.
So, but if there's no profit, I need profit.
Oh, we don't make money. Oh, like we don't make money. Is it what you're saying?
Right. If we so
you can still have profit in communism. Like you can still make money in a sense if you want to. If you want to keep monetary
incentive.
No, systems, not incentive.
Okay.
Because you can have transactional incentives, right? That aren't monetary based,
Sure.
right? But that's different, right? No, you have absolutely monetary incentives in communism, but the end goal isn't my one person or our board of directors that have a company of 1,000. We want to collect most of the profit. That is gone. That idea is gone, and I don't think that system is what gets us innovation. I think anything in the last 100 years in terms of innovation is linked towards government funding, which innately implies it needs the collective people to fund it. So innovation cannot be a private enterprise by default, in my opinion.
No, because if you watch Shark Tank, they fund new inventors all the time. They fund people who make new product all the time. It's done on a television show, right? And they give them money and they go make a product, right? So that's not. But saying the government already stole the money. You know what I'm saying? It's like saying, okay, you have to call the police because we say you can't have guns and you can't arrest these people. So now your only option now is to call the police. It's like, well, who set up those rules? I don't like those rules. Like saying that it comes from government funding. Well, the government already stole the money, right? It's not like it couldn't exist. There are people who want to make money, and part of them making money is investing in people who they think can come up with a good product, like on Shark Tank. I like that product. I'm willing to fund you. But that's collective funding. It's just voluntary, not forced.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'm fine with that too. I'm just not fine with the government doing it because that's based on that's blood money, that's stolen money.
But throw away government again. I know you keep harping on that word, but
I don't like that word.
I understand, but in today's system, taxation is the collective people paying into a service or a product, right? Whether that product is bomb in the Middle East or Social Security, right? Like that is what taxation is, right? Innately. Or police, whatever it is, like that's what taxation is, right?
Paying politicians 4 times what the average American makes. Yep.
And I think in a communist society, you would have some sort of taxation, to be honest. You would have some sort of collectivized wealth in order to pay for certain things. You would have to pay for hospitals, to pay for schools. You have to have some sort of collectivizing of wealth and ability to distribute it appropriately. How that would be decided is purely egalitarian and purely democratic. That's the difference. It wouldn't be you or Jeff Bezos in his ivory tower deciding I'm going to go in this city and plant a factory. It wouldn't be I'm going to take all the profits from this. Government or the people, right? I can use the government. The people, give me your wealth so I can go invest in this awesome new drone that's going to drop off boxes. You know, like that stuff in a sense is an example of a bad example in a way of how collectivizing wealth produces innovation. The problem is that innovation is just not collectively owned. Innovation is privately owned. That's the problem. We pay for the innovation, but we don't get the benefit of it. And
we get the benefit of it in the sense that you get the product, right? The improved product. Like we're talking over Zoom now. We're talking on.
But take it away from me and you outside the means of production. Let's say you're a worker with an Apple. You don't get, like, if you're the guy hammering in the wire in the iPhone in Taiwan, you're not receiving the profit of iPhones. You know what I mean? Like in a large sense, like
in a large sense, you're not, but how is that money coming to you? That your money is being paid in profit. That paycheck that you're getting, it's 50 cents a day, but that's part of that. That's the profit.
It's also coming from the government and subsidiaries from the people. Sorry, not the government. The people, not the government. Take out the government. The people are still paying into that as well. We pay for those Taiwanese or Indian workers to build iPhones.
That should never be done under any circumstance, ever.
But here's the thing. In a communist society, that's okay if those workers are paid, you know, an amount, not a wage. I don't want to use the term wage. I think we should get away from that. At least from me, I should get away from that. Paid an amount to live and to get their necessities off of and to really thrive as well. And also, they have equal ownership of the means of production as all those other workers there and as Timmy Apples. Like, in terms of, like, when Timmy Apple says, I want this factory to go to here and take out this guy's job, that shouldn't happen. So there are some counterbalances to these systems that make them democratic and will fundamentally change how capitalism is. It will make it not capitalism anymore. To make a company or a big business democratic and egalitarian fundamentally makes it not capitalistic because it's not individually owned. As you said, like the first grader Investopedia dictionary definition. It's not individually owned. It would be collectively owned, be collectively decided upon too. Gary, any other points or thoughts?
No, there's like more, and I want to get into like the quality of product and the marketing of product, but I don't have time to do that right now. I think those things are all, you know, my product is better than your product, and my product is going to better your life, right? And then, you know, Bernie Sanders would say there's 37 types of underarm deodorant, and we don't need that. Well, I think that we do because that's what the market bears, right? And I don't want to get into that, but I don't have time for that, right? Like, so what becomes of those products? Who decides what's a working wage? What if your labor doesn't warrant that wage? Or what if
I would say that you're maybe misunderstanding that point about like the 37 deodorants. I think that's often like a meme in a sense from us communists or socialists or social democrats, because Bernie isn't a communist. He's a social democrat who I would say is also not a Marxist. That would be like this is not an example of innovation. You have, 37 different types of Coca-Cola. That's not really an example of innovation. That would be kind of the talking point there. Not that shouldn't exist per se, but this is not an example of the innovation of capitalism, the greatness of capitalism is this. That's kind of the point there, to be honest. So in a communist society, you can have 37 Dr. Peppers, but that's not an argument for like the innovation of communism. You get what I'm saying?
Okay, all right. Perhaps the clip was taken out of context, which clips are taken out of context all the time. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it maybe misspoke. That happens, or misphrasing it. That happens. I do it all the time. It's bound to happen.
I call everyone by the wrong name at least 10 times a day, so I'm not going to get anyone for misspeaking. I can't even get my. Yeah, I got to get going. I said I'd be done 10 minutes ago.
Gary, this was fun though. I really enjoyed it.
It was.
And I think it was illuminating. I got to understand more of your perspective. I think you got to understand more of mine.
It was like, but as long as the more I know, now I got even more questions, right? And then we'll do it again.
Are you I'll ask this. What Marxist literature have you read, Gary, if you've read any? I'm curious.
The Communist Manifesto.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think you'd be really fascinated by the amount of literature out there, amount of theory out there. And again, you might not like all of it, which is fine. Like I guarantee if you read State Revolution, when Marx really, not Marx, when Lenin really starts talking about how the proletariats need to use the state and the state apparatus to suppress the suppressing class, I think you'd be like, you get a little squirmish about it. But there's, again, a wide breadth of theory out there I think you would really like. And I also think, Gary, you are slowly going around to my side.
No, I'm not. I can understand it, and we can talk about it, right? And as long as you're being, and this is why I hate the duopoly in American politics, because nobody's ever honest on what they really want, right? The only thing they're honest about is that they want their side to win. Right? But as long as you're being intellectually consistent in what you say, I can talk to you all day. If your thing is it's okay when I do it, but it's not okay when anyone else does it, or it's okay when my politician does it, but it's not okay when someone, I can't. There's no conversation with that, people, because there's no principles. You know what I'm saying? As long as you offer a principled position that which you actually believe in, which you do. I mean, we can talk about it all day. You're selling me on the idea that people are going to be just as motivated to innovate and work hard, you know, and not show up to work the next day drunk, without the profit model. That's a hard sell. I'm going to tell you, that's a really, really hard sell.
What about the understandings of capitalist hierarchies and exploitation? Or do you just kind of like disregard that completely because like that's not capitalism?
It's okay. I feel like you're giving every capitalist a black eye for a fight they weren't in. Okay, that may have happened. It's like saying every American owned, slaved, and stole land from the Native Americans. I didn't do that. I had nothing to do with that. Yes, I live on that land. I understand that. I didn't do that. I didn't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't do what you're.
I think that's a mischaracterization, to be honest. To use the example, I know we're trying to get off. I apologize. It's the last point. To use the example you use, like all American society had slavery, therefore, like you own slavery, right? Like that's not, I think, the right way of phrasing it. I would say that we think the American society had slavery, and the systems of oppression that existed in slavery still exist in a lot of ways today, and we see that regardless of personal morality, principles. Like I think this is where there's a philosophical like disconnect, almost like cognitive dissonance we have here, because you're, again, very individualistic person. I don't know if that's that derogatory sense. You know what I mean?
No, not at all.
So when you hear about, you know, critiques of systems, you then internalize it to the individual. That like, oh, it's that person, it's these people, it's that person, it's this person, it's me. And I don't think that's the issue, to be quite honest. I think it's the systems, right? So like, I don't care about the morality of Timmy Apples, to be honest. Like, I know I make jokes about like them going to the guillotine. Like, I don't care about the morality. It's the systems that oppress people. So like, they can be as nice or as evil as they are. That doesn't really matter. And I think that really doesn't even factor into what I want to see and how I wanted to see it happen. I just want the system to change. So like, I don't like for like American politics. I just want the systems of oppression to change, not to really blame anyone in particular, especially people that really don't have any real power. Like Gary, you don't have any real power, economic power in the real sense. You don't own, you know, big businesses. You know, like it's just not.
No, I have zero.
You don't own any means of production in the realist sense. Okay, and that's why I
not to impact people or things, but I control I control what I control. I control what I can do on my property. Right?
Means of production is in a very much a commercial term. So don't like take out like the idea of like you going to like plant like potatoes in your backyard. Like that's not the idea of like labor and means of production in the Marxist mind. We're thinking of factories, we're thinking of commercial buildings, we're thinking of more likely the big business side to it, because that is often how capitalism progresses, that small businesses get gobbled up by large monopolies. And the age of monopoly capital, which we have sort of been in for the last 100+ years, is kind of what we critique. Again, it's the system, not the people. So I understand like how a lot of people, not just you, Gary, hear like a critique of slavery or a critique of whatever, critique of capitalism or critique of private ownership, right? And you go, well, I own my house, or I used to own a business. You're saying that I should get guillotined? And it's like, no. I just think that most people in our society are in favor of democracy, and we should just take that from a political issue to an economic issue. We should talk about democratizing the workplace. Now, I don't think that implies demonizing anyone or making anyone lesser than. It just means to uplift others, because CEOs are still going to be getting more money than the factory worker, but let's not get the factory worker in poverty. Let's have the factory worker have a decision-making process or power when it comes to relocation or change of ownership. Those are simple things I think that people can agree on. That's very different.
What if the factory worker's wage, I mean, his labor, isn't worth what you would say is a living wage? What if his labor's not worth that? Like let me give you an example. What if we own an electronics company, and I work all day, night and day, day and night, morning, noon, and night, making VCRs.
Way to go back to the 90s.
Right? No, I'm saying you work real hard all day. You work all day making VCRs, and I make a great VCR, but I can't sell that thing. Nobody wants it. So like it doesn't, like your labor, as good as it isn't worth anything because I can't sell your product. The
reality is, like, let's say, like you in that business, you would probably not make money in that business, but the system we have created in terms of like society would mean that you don't go into abject poverty because of that. Like if you have a bad business idea and you make a product that no one wants, you should not go into poverty and lose your home for that. That would be sort of like the Marxist response. Like we would create systems to where you are taken care of if that happens. Like you still have a house, you can still pay for food, like you can still go to a doctor, you can still go to school if you're in school or your kids are in school. Like these things should not, your economic position should not be barriers to happiness and to the well-being of life, from a health perspective, from a medical perspective, and from like a physical perspective, from like shelter in that sense, right? That would be my argument. That like, yeah, you might not make money in that business, but you're not going to go lose your home.
So then, like the money that comes from the other people who made a productive product.
No, but that happens already.
So as long as it's voluntary, I'm fine with that, right? I think it's a great thing. Me and my wife donate to lots of charities. So I think that's fantastic, right? But so as long as it's voluntary, as long as there's not someone showing up at my house taking a gun and saying, "I'm taking your money to help someone who with a bad idea."
You would remember, like I said, you would still have some form of taxation in a sense, right? Because you would still have communal collectivization of wealth in order to pay for things, right? Some of those things would be like social safety nets in a way, like schools, hospitals. Like you should not have to pay at the point of access, right? To go get a doctor. That should be collectively funded. Same with schools, same with that stuff, you know. And same with like people out of work, you know, like unemployment, you know, like if you can't work, if your company failed, whatever it may be, you're not gonna lose your home for that, because the home is collectively owned in a sense, right? In terms of when we talk about land being redistributed back, we will have to take all land to the community at one point and then redistribute it back to make it as equal as possible to get everyone a home. Though in actuality, that might not happen, because like look at our country, right? Like we have how many empty homes right now? Like 3 million empty homes, and like 500,000 people out of work habitually, right? So we already have enough homes empty right now to house all the homeless population 3 times over, basically. So like I would say like these issues on like, oh, like who's gonna fund the person that business failed, like that's not an issue, because when your business fails, when you are out of work, whatever it may be, you're taken care of as well. It's universal. Like the social safety nets are as universal as possible. It's not just universal. That's why. So like you are benefiting of the healthcare, the free housing, whatever it may be.
Well, there's so much there. Well, that's another episode entirely. Like that's
2 or 3 weeks. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
Give us some breath. Give us some time to read too, because I want you to read some Marxist literature. Because look, as even though I think I do a decent job of describing some stuff, it's much better to read it from, like, the horse's mouth. Is that the right term? Get it from the horse's mouth?
Yeah, I think so. That sounds right.
Sounds right. Again, go outside Communist Manifesto. If you need some recommendations, Gary, I'll send you some recommendations, whatever. And likewise, send me some recommendations back. I will gladly read some stuff that's more of your vein if you want. And I will also, just out of default, send you stuff on abolition of money, because I think we both need to be.
I think that's like an interesting concept, right? Like, I'm not going to say I'm for it or I'm not going to say I'm against it. It's just I don't know enough to make it. Like, the jury's still out for me. Like, I haven't heard anything. Like, I need to hear more on that. It's an interesting concept.
It's definitely existed in the past. It exists in parts of the world right now where money doesn't exist. So it's not like it doesn't happen. It just, the idea of it on like a large scale is something that we haven't really seen. But anyways, this was a great talk, Gary. I love this. Sorry for taking you way over your time.
I'm gonna get in trouble
now. We'll be back. Shit. What fights are tomorrow, Gary?
Tomorrow is just the Conor Benn fight. It's not that really that good of a day. Does Javier Fortuna fight tomorrow? Is that off because of COVID? Doesn't it?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Anyway,
I think it's just the Conor Benn fight, and then there was O'Shaquie Foster fought yesterday on that NBC Sports. He fought Mickey Roman. He beat him up over 9 rounds and then finally stopped him. But it looked like he was going to get him out in the first round. He hurt him real bad, but then Mickey Roman, Mexican legend, he wasn't going to go out in the first round. And then he did okay, but I mean he was getting beat up, but he was landing some shots, and then in the 9th round he finally got him out.
Well, we should be back Sunday. I'll say Sunday. To review the little fights this weekend, get some more topics and news. So Sunday, MCR on our other channel. Me and Gary will be back on, talk some boxing. And we should be back on to debate more Marxism and libertarianism in a couple weeks after we do some more reading, guys. Have a great day, great night, great evening, wherever you are in the world, guys. And remember, fuck the police. And Gary agrees with me on that. And free Palestine. I don't know if Gary agrees with me on that, but it doesn't matter. Fuck the police.
Free people. Free people.
Yeah,
free people from governments. It's coercion. Free people.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick question. You're for the abolition of borders, obviously, I'm assuming. In
a perfect society, yeah. There's private property borders. It's my property, and the only borders are private property borders.
Yes, yes, I understand. All right. Anyways, guys, have a good one. Peace.